Hello, AP and CCP US history students. Today we're going to talk about the second inaugural address of Abraham Lincoln. Now, we've looked at his Lyceum address, we've looked at his Peoria, his House Divided speech, we've looked at his fragment on the Constitution, we've even looked at the Gettysburg Address. Today we're going to focus on his second inaugural, which was part of your reading packet from back over winter break. Remember, you always have to put a document into context. And Abraham Lincoln is giving this speech on March 4th, 1865. Now, what is going on at that point? We have been at war for almost 4 years. The war has torn, quite literally, the country apart. It has killed over 600,000 people within the United States. This is a huge transition coming up here because we are going from a nation at war to a nation that has to now heal. So Abraham Lincoln, his tone, you will notice, completely changed. Whereas in the first inaugural, he was kind of setting up for the possibility of war. In March of 1861, it was not a foregone conclusion. Even though they had started the secession movement, there was no inevitability there. It was kind of like, well, maybe if we say the right things or we have the right negotiation, we can bring the nation back together. After 4 years of war, now he's quite literally having to sew this back together, having to bring the nation back together. So his tone has to be completely different. Now they're at the tail end of a war that will end about 5 weeks afterwards. Now, keep in mind, this is one of the last speeches of Lincoln's life because he will also not really see the end of the war. He will be assassinated in about 5 weeks from this time, too. So whereas Lee will surrender to Grant, which pretty much precipitates the end of the war, it still drags on for about a month or so before all of the soldiers have truly capitulated in the South. Lincoln is going to basically be assassinated in April. So you've got about 5 weeks more of Lincoln after this speech. So it's important to kind of look at what he's discussing here because we are in transition mode from going from war to Reconstruction, which Lincoln did not like the term Reconstruction. He didn't believe that you needed to reconstruct the Union because keep in mind, and I've said this before, Lincoln never really believed the southern states left. He never believed that they left the Union. There was no secession. He believed secession was unconstitutional. So what the states did was basically create a conflict within themselves. Okay, that they were not two nations fighting each other. They were one nation at war with each other. But this brings up another problem that Lincoln will have to deal with because what do you do with people that have made war against the nation? You know, what do you do with people that have literally taken up arms and killed people within our country because that is treason. And according to the Constitution, if you commit treason and you are guilty of it, you are killed. You know, the federal government basically kills you and hangs you or shoots you or whatever else. So does he do that to Jefferson Davis? Does he do that to Robert E. Lee? Does he say any soldier that fought on the battlefields for the Southern Confederacy, do those people all have to be rounded up and jailed, shot, hanged? You know, what, or do you just let them go? So there's all these questions that need to be answered. Keep in mind during this time period too, there's questions about what do we do about slavery because the Emancipation Proclamation has said that in the areas of rebellion, any time that the American soldiers, the Union soldiers would come through and secure that area, all those slaves were now emancipated. Does that continue to be the case, or are these people going to be re-enslaved? If not, if they are emancipated, why just there? Why not all across the South? Because there were areas of the South that were not conquered, so to speak, by the Union Army. So do you tell slaves that are in places like Virginia and North Carolina where maybe soldiers had not tread yet, do you tell those slaves that they are still enslaved? So there's all manner of questions about what to do. Do you still allow the slavery to happen in the border states? So all of this is going to play out, of course, but Lincoln has to set the tone. And he starts off with fellow countrymen, which is a very awkward statement. Fellow countrymen. Does that mean Americans? Does that mean just Union? Is he including the Southerners in this? Because by this point, many of the Southerners are in captured Union territory. So who's he really talking to? And he says, at this second appearing to take the oath of the presidential office, there is less occasion for an extended address than there was at the first. Then a statement, somewhat in detail, of course to be pursued, seemed fitting and proper. Now, at the expiration of 4 years, during which public declarations have been constantly called forth on every point and phase of the great contest which still absorbs the attention and engrosses the energies of the nation, little that is new could be presented. The progress of our arms, upon which all else chiefly depends, is as well known to the public as to myself, and it is, I trust, reasonably satisfactory and encouraging to all, with high hope for the future, no prediction in regard to its ventured. Okay, so what is he really saying? No new information. There's nothing I can tell you that you don't already know. So why spend time talking about the war? I'd much rather talk about things that haven't happened yet. So that's kind of where he's headed. On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it, all sought to avert it. Is that really true? Is the question. Did all seek to avoid it? Because obviously there were people who were calling for this. So even Lincoln's kind of glossing over and creating kind of a new alternate history there. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Keep in mind, he's saying, hey, while I was talking about bringing the nation back together, other people were kind of undermining that effort and causing a war. Remember when in 1860 he wins the presidency, South Carolina says, well, he's not my president, so we're leaving. They almost put it on Lincoln that it's Lincoln's fault. If Lincoln wasn't president, then this would not have happened. Here's Lincoln saying, no, they would have done that regardless. I was trying to bring it together. I was trying to sow the seeds of friendship, and you guys were ripping this country apart. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. And that's as simple a statement as you can get. And the war came. Okay? There is an accusation, however subtle, that the South caused the war, sort of, maybe. Because here's the thing. Does he come out and say, oh, the South did it? The South were the cause of the war. Could he have, or should he have the right to say, hey, the Southerners caused this sucker? Here I was trying to calm things down, and they just, no matter what I did, they seemed to rip it apart. Now, some historians have looked at it and said he meant the Southerners. That's what he meant. Others have said, well, he left it awfully vague, and for somebody that was usually very literal about things, he kind of danced around it a little bit. And could there possibly be some Northern interests that caused this as well? So is he placing blame on everybody? Is he placing blame on one specific group? Is it regional? Is it the whites? Is it, is it moneyed interests? Is it people in the government? We don't know. But that's the power of Lincoln. Either way, no matter what happened, the war came, and the war came. No matter what we were going to do, that's what was going to happen. So it's almost Lincoln saying, hey, this is inevitable. This was going to happen. No matter what I did, this was going to happen. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. So this is one of the first times Lincoln really flat out says that the Civil War was caused by slavery. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union, even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. So again, this is all going back to, hey, as we got new territory in the West, as we started to expand through the Mexican War, through Texas, through whatever, slavery always seemed to be the driving force and the most divisive of issues during that time period. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it already had attained. Again, he's right on that. Nobody expected the war to be as bad as it was. Remember, I told you at the first Battle of Manassas or Bull Run, as the soldiers were going out, there was a picnic going on. These people had to run for their lives when the Union started to lose, because everybody just kind of expected this battle to just kind of be kind of entertaining instead of a decisive battle to start the war. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with, or even before the conflict itself should cease. Okay. And he's saying slavery was the cause, but it was not going to be guaranteed to be solved by this conflict. So even Lincoln's saying, hey, while slavery caused this conflict, we weren't going off to fight the war to actually set these guys free. There was no plan in place at the very beginning to emancipate the slaves. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man should dare ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of another man's face. But let us not judge that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. Weirdly enough, he's using and invoking biblical passages. Okay, Genesis 3:19, Matthew 7:1. Those are contained in this. He continues on, the Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs that offenses come, but woe to that man whom the offense cometh. That's Matthew 18:7. Okay, if we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in his providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives both to the North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from whose divine attributes, which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Okay, after all that, it's almost like Lincoln's kind of out now thinking, hey, we don't get to decide when slavery goes away. God is deciding this. And because we didn't do anything, because we allowed this to just be perpetuated over and over again, this massive war may be God's punishment to both sides. Yes, the South had slavery, but the North seemingly allowed it. You know, the North perpetuated it with our manufacturing interests and the interests of getting cotton cheaper and continuing our economy and continuing our political institutions. So he's almost kind of saying, hey, look, we both have blood on our hands. There's nobody is perfect here. Nobody is, without sin here. So what does that mean? Lincoln is almost kind of saying at this point, just because we won the war, just because we're winning the war and most likely will defeat the South, that doesn't mean that we are blameless. And it certainly doesn't mean that we get to have this kind of victor's parade where our mentality was so superior and so much better than the Southern. We are both to blame for this very awful Civil War where hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens are dead. Okay, so this is all our fault, collectively our fault. Okay, and it kind of says one side or both sides must be wrong, two cannot be right. So, and again, the blood of men, blood of 250 plus years of slavery is going to be kind of brought up here. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. That's Psalm 19:9. Okay, so he's again kind of using biblical prophecies almost and biblical teachings in his speech here. And what he meant by that 250 years of the lash, he's kind of saying, look, we've lost about 600,000 Americans in this conflict. But is that equal to all of the slaves that have died by wicked offenses against humanity through slavery? Maybe we're going to continue this war until God is satisfied that enough white blood has been shed to equate for all of the black blood that has been shed during 250 years worth of slavery. So he's almost kind of saying, look, if you think you haven't suffered, if you think you've suffered too much, maybe God's not done with this yet. Maybe you have to pay a little bit more in blood. So this is almost kind of saying, hey, look, we're all in this together now. So if he is talking to the North and to the South, the blame is going around. Everybody's got a hand in this. Okay. And it kind of almost is saying maybe this is the justice of God. War is a punishment for this sin, for the American sin of American slavery. Okay. My favorite line by far is what he finishes off with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right. Okay. So with malice towards none, I don't hate you. Okay. Regardless of who you are. So in this sense, he almost kind of answers that he is talking to the South. Okay. I don't have hatred in my heart for you. With charity for all, we're going to reach out and continue to support each other as we always have. And with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. So he's not just talking about peace between the North and the South. He's just talking in general. We're done fighting. There's no reason to fight. Let's now heal each other. It's a whole paragraph of forgiveness and mercy, which is not what happens during Reconstruction. Sadly, John Wilkes Booth's bullet that takes out Lincoln basically seals any chance that the North is going to kindly allow the South back in. Weirdly enough, Booth thinks that Lincoln is the worst human being and the biggest war criminal, and that the South would be better off if he was dead. After his assassination, the South is actually treated worse. Okay, so you have the radical Republicans, which we'll talk about when we talk about Reconstruction here, who almost kind of say, well, now vengeance is ours. So they're going to turn away from what Lincoln is saying we need to do here out of vengeance for them killing Lincoln. In the end, though, who are the people that never get bound up out of all of this? It's going to be the ex-slaves. Because even though they're going to get the 13th Amendment, in just a few weeks after this, the 13th Amendment is going to be passed and later ratified. 13th Amendment frees the slaves across the United States. Slavery it ceases to exist. And it's closely followed by the 14th and the 15th. The 14th Amendment grants towards the former slaves citizenship, that they have the rights of every other citizen. It's the Equality Amendment, that citizens are equal under the law. And then the 15th Amendment extends suffrage or voting rights to African American males. All of those that are considered the Civil War amendments are highly controversial, but they're pushed through because Lincoln pushes for them, number one, but then they are pushed even harder after Lincoln's assassination, and they are forced upon the South during radical Reconstruction, which we'll get to. Okay. Again, Lincoln in this speech, he's really living up to his whole, I would rather have reconciliation than Reconstruction. He thought Reconstruction was too, simplistic. Reconciliation requires a human aspect to it. Okay. By January of 1865, the 13th Amendment had already been passed. So they had already passed it in Congress, but then they were going to ratify it in December. Okay. So it actually expedited that. And again, Lincoln kind of writes this out. This is his speech. This is back when presidents actually did compose their own speeches. Okay, the last president to actually compose his own speeches was Calvin Coolidge. Everybody else has had a group of speechwriters kind of helping them out. But Lincoln is writing his own. Okay, and Lincoln even kind of says to a friend, Thurlow Weed, in a letter, he said he knows that the speech will not be popularly received, as there is no flattery to anyone, but blame for all. So he almost kind of admits, I am blaming everybody. Everybody's got a hand in this. Okay. And this is almost kind of linking the Gettysburg Address to this, because this is his new birth of freedom in action. Freedom is the responsibility of all Americans, that we have to work on it. We can't just accept it as being true. We have to work on it. We have to bind the wounds. We have to work together to make the nation better. The problem is that Lincoln gives this speech where, again, and I should have been scrolling this, with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right. Did we actually get to that? And the answer is no. Lincoln's death pretty much kills this opportunity. So if you wonder why Lincoln is always kind of held up as being one of our best presidents, aside from the obvious that he was president during the Civil War and guided us through this and pushed through things like the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, it's really his vision. It's a vision of the United States actually working with each other, trying to reconcile, trying to heal each other, to have charity, to not hate each other, to bring people together. And isn't that really what people in even today's political climate really kind of want? There are certainly people that are, there's, one side that's, stop the steal, Trump, Trump, Trump. And there's other people that are saying, Biden's legitimate and you need to shut up and deal with it. And then there are all the people in the middle that are saying, can we just move on? Can we just move on and become Americans? And you're starting to hear that, this message of, hey, we need to unify, we need to come together. And isn't that kind of the Lincoln-esque belief structure that we just, all right, yes, we've had this divisiveness, but let's move on. Okay, so Lincoln kind of rings out every single time we seem to have a divisive time period because his words matter. His rhetoric is something that is a goal. It's something we're trying to do. Now, again, why does that matter? I always find it interesting, and this is my own personal opinion here. I always find it interesting that Lincoln held the Declaration of Independence as the most important document, that was the most important thing. That was the mission statement for our country, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He viewed that as the nation's mission statement. Everything else we've done with the Constitution, with ordinances, compromises, amendments, everything that we've done is just amplifying that mission statement. So when we talk about Lincoln-esque, it's us trying to live up to the goal set forth from the very beginning of our republic. And it shows that Lincoln is always kind of keeping that in mind, that we are trying to get to that goal. And with malice towards none, life, charity for all, liberty, pursuit of happiness, firmness in the right. We're all trying to do things together. It's kind of like a reformatting of what we've already said in our first document ever as a unified nation. So if we take a page out of Lincoln's book here, quite literally a page out of his speeches, our goal as a nation is to unify. Our goal as a nation is to promote each other's liberty, to promote each other's freedom, to promote each other's life, and to promote each other's options or opportunities in that life. So if you're going to take a page out of Lincoln, let's unify, let's come together, and let's move forward as Americans. Okay? Again, that's kind of the second inaugural address. Now, what does it tell you that the guy who says that gets killed? Okay, now he gets killed for a multitude of other things. It's not like John Wilkes Booth heard this speech and went, well, now he's got to die. He already had a plan in place. But weirdly enough, the guy that speaks like this, the guy that works towards unity and peace, is going to get killed. And this is a common theme, unfortunately, in American history, because Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, people that have been assassinated, many times they look at the rhetoric and they see it's very Lincoln-esque in its tone. It's very unifying and it's very pro-American and togetherness and working with each other. So what does that tell us about American history? That, people that speak like this sometimes are martyrs to the cause, sadly. So kind of keep that in mind as we go through, that there's a general theme in there too, that hatred always seems to strike these people down. The question is, do we as a nation rise above that? Do we as a nation hear their words and seek that as the goal instead of allowing for hatred to win? So again, I know those are deep thoughts and everything, but it's amazing what you can get out of short speeches like this one. Lincoln didn't speak long. He was done in just a few minutes. It was kind of like, all right, well, here I am taking the oath of office again, and now I'm going to go do the job. So it was almost kind of a throwaway, and yet it's rung through years and years and years after this conflict. It kind of sustained us 150 plus years after the Civil War. We're still looking for his advice. We're still seeking counsel from Abraham Lincoln. All right, folks. Again, this is kind of the whole synopsis of Lincoln, if you will. We've really focused on that. Keep in mind, next week you do have a multiple choice test and a DBQ. Don't be surprised if there aren't some snippets from Lincoln in there because we've spent so much time on it. So please make sure that you understand those speeches. Please make sure that you're paying attention to kind of the themes involved. Reach out if you have any questions or concerns. Hopefully you're staying healthy, staying happy, staying safe. Enjoy your time away from school, and we'll see you next week.